Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and talk about the iPhone 12 Pro and see how this phone holds up in 2023. Now, personally, I think the iPhone 12 Pro is still a tremendous phone for sure. I think this device, brought a lot to the table and everything, but during my over a year of using this phone, I had a very, very weird time with it, if I'm going to be honest. I don't want to say every single iPhone 12 Pro is going to experience this, but my experience is probably no different than a lot of yours. So I do just want to kind of point that out there, first of all. But regardless, if you want to pick up some phones I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPhone 12 Pro, we have a, very, very good premium body on the back and the outside for the most part. On the front, we had a 6.1-inch Super Retina XDR OLED display, and it was a pretty good panel, coming from the iPhone 11 Pro, and even, kind of compared to the iPhone 14 Pro, it's, 1170 by 2532, fairly high resolution. It still has a notch and everything, but it's really not that big of a deal. The main, issues, not the main issue, but the main problem I would say with this specific display is the lack of 120 Hertz. So this was the last Pro iPhone without a 120 Hertz panel. So that was kind of the disadvantage here. Again, not like a big deal breaker or anything, but it was one of those things that kind of, wanted me to switch over to the 13 Pro faster than the iPhone, than keeping the iPhone 12 Pro. You still have the Face ID and everything, which is nice. On the sides though, you do actually have the flat side on this iPhone. These were the first set of iPhones to bring back the flat sides since the iPhone 5S or iPhone SE first gen. That was some really good stuff. I like having flat sides. I like having curved sides too. I still haven't found the one I like more, but that was something that's really cool, and I'm glad that Apple ended up making the switch back because it kind of makes the phone feel much more premium, which is very, very strange. You have the lightning port at the bottom, and on the back you have the frosted glass back, which still feels very, very premium. As I mentioned in the last few years, the frosted glass back is easily one of my favorite design tweaks that Apple has made since the iPhone, I can't even remember, the iPhone 11 Pro brought it in, and ever since then the Pro models have had it. And again, that is a great way that Apple has distinguished the Pro models from the cheaper models. So I think that in and of itself is really awesome. You still have wireless charging on this phone, you have IP certification on this phone, which is great. Apple did end up bringing that MagSafe charging capability, which kind of debuted with these phones as well, which is also really cool. Since then, Apple's made those MagSafe chargers and everything. I'm not a big fan of wireless charging your device, but this phone has that capability, which is nice. So on the outside, I still think this phone looks beautiful. You have that triple camera setup up there as well, which we'll talk about literally in 2 seconds. And overall, when you're still using this phone in this day and age, it doesn't really feel that much different than maybe the iPhone 14 Pro. I will say though, with the 14 Pro, it is a much heavier phone. It is definitely a better phone overall, but the 12 Pro still holds up very well in my opinion. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now in the camera department, like I mentioned, this phone has that triple camera setup on the back. So it has a 12 megapixel wide angle lens, 12 megapixel telephoto lens, and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. And then on the front, it has a 12 megapixel wide angle lens as well. Now, luckily for us, we can do 4K at 60 on the back and the front of both these cameras. And for my year of owning this phone back in, I think, 2020 to 2021 or something, this was a pretty good camera. I didn't really have too much to complain about, and coming from my 11 Pro, it didn't really seem like a downgrade, at least in the camera department. But since then, when I compare this thing against the iPhone 13 Pro and the 14 Pro, there are some pretty big differences. For one, we now get cinematic mode, which is nice. We get stabilization mode on the 14 Pros, but a really big thing I noticed is that there's way less grain inside of the newer cameras than this one. So that was something that kind of stood out to me. I don't know what that, kind of caused that. It wouldn't really persuade me of upgrading or not upgrading for the most of it, if I'm being completely honest, but it was one of those things that I did mention, or I did notice at that time. I still think it's a very good camera though. If you're somebody who just wants to go ahead and take, standard photos and videos, and you want to go and take a photo and maybe post it on Snapchat or, Instagram or TikTok, whatever the case is, this is going to be a very good camera for that. Even if you're wanting to take some videos for a YouTube video or something, this is going to be perfectly fine, but there are definitely some other cameras out there in the market that may do a better job than this camera. So definitely keep that in mind. But regardless, still gets a thumbs up for me. There's not really a crazy amount to complain about here. Now moving on to the software and the longevity portion, this is another very interesting portion of this phone because it's still supported with software. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. And definitely when you look at the other phones that, have been coming out the last couple of years, Apple has been kind of changing a few things here and there with the software side, but it looks to me at least that the 12 Pro is still going to be supported for several more years. Again, I have no idea how much longer that's actually going to be, whether it's 3 or 4 or 5 years, I'm not really too sure, but this phone really only got its second version of software this year. It came out with iOS 14, it got 15, then it just got 16. It's probably going to get iOS 17, 18, maybe even 19 as well. Maybe it'll even reach iOS 20, who knows? If Apple ends up changing a few things, especially with iOS 17 being a smaller update, this phone still has a long future ahead of it. So from that perspective in and of itself, that is actually a massive win for something like the iPhone 12 Pro. If Apple can actually continue supporting this phone for that much longer, that is going to be a massive reason to actually pick up a phone like an iPhone 12 Pro rather than maybe an iPhone 11 Pro or 10 or 10s or whatever those other older phones are, because this phone is still going to be supported for many, many more years. So that is definitely something to kind of keep in mind. Now on the performance side, this phone has that Apple A14 Bionic chip inside of it with 6GB of RAM. Now from my perspective and from my opinion of using this phone for the last few years, I haven't really had too many things to complain about in the performance side. The performance of this phone was actually pretty decent. It really wasn't that big of a jump from my previous phone at all, the 11 Pro, but still I think it performs very, very well. For certain tasks that I'll kind of break down when I was using this phone, I was just basically really just texting, calling, going on Reddit, watching YouTube videos. I never really edited any videos on my iPhone. I've played a few games, maybe like Call of Duty Mobile just to test it out, but I wasn't really doing too much mobile gaming at that time. So it really was just basically comparing this phone in terms of speed against the previous phones. And since then I've compared it, since I've stopped using it, to the iPhone 13 Pro and 14 Pro and many other phones in the market, and it holds up fairly well. It doesn't seem like a slow phone at all. I do think the thing that it's lacking the most is that smoothness from the display. I think iOS is a very smooth operating system, but when you do have that, 120 Hertz panel, things do perform and just look so much smoother. Even though nothing's actually faster, it just looks faster and smoother, which I love looking at. So I think the performance of this phone is still very good. You still have a large amount of RAM on this device as well, so you're not really missing out on anything in that perspective either. So I do think when you have a phone like this, you are in a pretty good situation in terms of the performance side. But this brings me to probably the thing that I would say is probably the worst thing about this phone, which is the battery. Now the battery size isn't that low, 2815, definitely wasn't the biggest size, but it's definitely not a small size either. But the biggest problem I had with this phone is actually with the battery degrading super fast over time. Now I don't know why this happened, but a lot of iPhone 12 and iPhone 12 Pro owners actually complained about this. And, it's very rare that I experience problems that a lot of people complain about, but I experienced these problems, which was so crazy. So my battery ended up degrading down to like 80 something percent in like less than a year, which was crazy. On normal usage, on everything was perfectly, I didn't change anything. In fact, I was indoors most of the time because this was late 2020, early 2021. So it's still kind of like in that situation. And I think, I was perfect. I was indoors. I wasn't really doing anything crazy with my phone. I think it mostly had to do with wireless charging, but it was one of those things to kind of keep in mind. So from the performance side, it's great, but the battery life kind of is a little iffy in most areas. So to kind of sum up this video, what I'll tell you is I think the iPhone 12 Pro is still worth it. I think it's a great phone. Just make sure you're getting the 12 Pro that doesn't have massive battery degradation. If you're buying it in the used market, which I think Apple's not selling maybe they're selling certified refurbished. If you want to go down that route, I would recommend it. But if you're planning on getting a 12 Pro, just double check that battery hasn't been degraded too much, and then you might be in a good spot. As long as the battery hasn't degraded a crazy amount, you should be in a good situation and you probably won't have to worry about it too much. So in terms of that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.